6 years ago, a teaser for a game called Project Eve hit the internet. It was a typical recruitment trailer from a Korean developer, ShiftUp. Unfortunately, there wasn't much to see, and the developers were previously known for making a series of mobile games. I saw this and thought it would be a fruitless attempt at breaking into the AAA scene, but I also couldn't judge very much because it was clear that hardly anything was set in stone. 2 years later, and we now had a full look at Project Eve, and what a look it was. I fondly remember looking at the trailer and thinking, wait a minute, I've seen this marketing strategy before. I'm not entirely against using sex appeal as a marketing strategy, especially when clearly it works so well, but it definitely doesn't instill confidence. So much attention is drawn to the protagonist's cheeks that not only had my sitting desk turned into a standing desk, but I wondered with my wiser head, what were those buns hiding? I want to see some meat, some sauce, hey, maybe some gameplay, but I'd have to wait a whole nother year before we'd see that, and when we did, I was sold. It looked so good and had a proper name now, Stellar Blade. And wow, I mean the animation work was top notch, the environment seemed good, and solid action was on the table too, and yet, those are some dislikes. I wonder why. The answer is exclusivity. See, when Project Eve was first announced, it was advertised as coming to the PlayStation, Xbox, and Windows platforms. But now, it was a PlayStation exclusive. These days, it's not a big deal because it's playable on PC, but back when this trailer dropped, it was a huge letdown for non-PlayStation players. For me, I hardly noticed, because there was a different trend that was much more annoying. Let's not pretend like sexualization hasn't been a thing in media since the fucking Stone Ages, okay? And again, it works! My problem comes from when we inject culture war bullshit into it. For example, the keep politics out of video games people are saying Stellar Blade is anti-woke because its main character is attractive. This, as far as what I was seeing, was entirely because the protagonist was cheeked up. Look, half the reason I don't engage with this culture war stuff too much on the channel is for exactly this reason. The parameters for something being woke, anti-woke, political, or apolitical coming down to a pair of tits is unbelievably dense, especially when, in spite of this game supposedly being anti-woke, it still supposedly censored itself after launch, as one of the skins was changed to be ever so slightly less revealing. Now, let's pretend that the literal skin suit, i.e. the pseudo-nude skin which is available from the moment you boot the game, isn't available, and yeah, maybe ShiftUp is becoming prude, but what frustrated me most about this conversation was how encompassing it was. I hardly heard anyone talking about the game itself. So, I wanted to try it for myself, and that's how this video spawned. While it took me a while to get around to it, I felt that Stellar Blade, a year later, needed a deeper look that wasn't in service of or in opposition to a culture war. After a whole year and a whole PC port, Stellar Blade deserves to be perceived beneath the surface level jokes of haha, character hot. In doing so, there will be spoilers ahead. I think Stellar Blade in a few ways fell victim to assumption, because even I assumed a lot about the game that ended up being wrong. I remember seeing some gameplay and assuming, oh great, another Souls-like. We really need more of those, guys! These were expectations shared by some friends of mine, some of which further noted, and I quote, that it's obviously a Gooner game, and if I play it, my parents will really give up on me. But the truth is, Stellar Blade's inspirations don't even start at Dark Souls, and really, I would say the Souls games are one of its lesser inspirations. Stellar Blade takes inspirations from a myriad of action-adventure games, but what separates itself from other games is how and when those ideas show up. If Stellar Blade is to be a heavy hitter for Sony and ShiftUp, then it would need its own identity. There are two parts of the word identity, and I think we should address the latter because it plays a large role in how some people saw the game. There's nothing wrong with a little sex appeal, and if you were to try and avoid it, then chances are you'd be playing Minecraft and nothing else. But in terms of marketing, it's important that the sexualization doesn't overshadow the game, i.e. cause a potential player to assume that this is a $90 softcore smut-like masquerading as a Souls-like. Once I finished Stellar Blade, I tried to recommend it to friends and was immediately met with the aforementioned Gooner game accusations, and those are hard to refute, for as much as I tried. But why is it hard? Because it's not entirely false. How can we identify something as a Gooner game? For starters, we're not 12, so let's discuss sexualization and not gooning. At what point is a character over-sexualized? Is that such a thing? Let's start with the most fun, which is jiggle physics. The jiggle physics in this game have a tendency to be, for lack of a better term, comedic. In some cutscenes, we can see Eve's chest moving quite naturally, but in some animations, like when opening a crate, her ass recoils like a thin water balloon in a magnitude 8 earthquake. This kind of underdeveloped physics leads to Eve having comedically jiggly moving parts. And let's not pretend this is for realism, okay? That kind of defense is thrown out the window when we look at the bunny suits that the game gives you, and when we consider that the director himself stated on multiple times that Eve is designed this way so players, to paraphrase, have something nice to look at. This is for sex appeal. However, it's hard to see said sex appeal as anything other than funny when it looks like this. This leads many to immediately identify Stellar Blade with fulfilling some kind of sexual fantasy, and I don't entirely think that's ShiftUp's intention. Let's look at Eve as a character to see why. Eve is as dull as a 2x4 for basically the entirety of the game. She speaks in a constant monotone delivery, and stop it! I see you typing! Well, actually, she's an android! And that's an excellent defense if Lily, another android, didn't have significantly more personality than her. I imagine Eve's portrayal is meant to come off as more stoic than robotic. It's clear that a lot of her inspiration comes from classic femme fatale characters of gaming like Bayonetta, Lara Croft, and the British accent sells that even more. What separates her from others for me is not just the cybernetic aesthetic, but the customization players have over her. I had a ridiculous amount of fun playing dress up in this game, changing my clothes, hair, earrings, glasses, and it allowed me to serve in my own way. And it let me care about Eve more because part of my journey with her was indicated by the cosmetics I picked up along the way, often obtained from the people she and I met. Eve's sex appeal, however, is never part of that journey, as it never really changes or influences who she is and what she does. To reiterate, the problem isn't sexualization, and if it was, I'd have a big problem with great games like Nier Automata. Instead, the problem is who that sexuality is in service of. Making comparisons between Eve and 2B makes sense when we look at the broader influences of the game, and even the collaborative DLC between the two games, but more so, we can see that 2B's sexualization was in service of the audience and the plot. Without spoiling anything, because I do think Nier Automata is a great game, essentially, 2B's sexualization is integral to a twist near the end of the game, but it's important to also note that her appearance was influenced by the game's director stating that they, quote-unquote, really like girls. Nothing wrong with that, I like him too, but I think the problem people feel with Stellar Blade is that the sexualization is only ever in service of the player. Eve never uses seduction to get her way, never acknowledges the lust that she's in service of, and when we couple this with the character's many outfits ranging from sexy Santa to maid attire, then it becomes clear that this sexiness is in service of the player and nothing else. Now to speak personally, I don't necessarily have a problem with Eve's looks outside of how cartoonish the physics can be at times. Personally, I want to see diversity in gaming characters, which includes women of all shapes and sizes, and of course women of all waistlines and cup sizes. I do find myself annoyed with how much the game caters to people that want to stare at jiggly bitties though, because it shifts the conversation away from the great game underneath it, but that's less of a problem with the game and more of a problem with the people who consume and discuss it. Stellar Blade deserves to have its identity, gameplay, story, and even impact critiqued without constantly reminding people that yes, she is an attractive character. So yeah, the game is going to have a hard time beating off the Gooner game allegations, but fortunately, it's also going to have a hard time beating the great game allegations too. When it comes to gameplay, as mentioned, it seemed like the Souls games were an inspiration, and based off trailers, that sure looks to be the case. We got parrying, bonfires, and mostly single target combat. Looks Souls-like to me, but really, that couldn't be further from the truth. I don't want to deny the impact those games had on Stellar Blade, but it would be more accurate to say this game was inspired by FromSoft like many modern video games are, but they simply adapt those ideas and make them their own instead of trying to chase and adopt that entire style of game. This is what differentiates a game's inspirations from being inspired and being derivative. A derivative game is one that seems like it's taken mechanics and ideas from a bunch of different games and cobbled it together. An inspired game is one that wears its inspirations on its sleeves, but pays respect to those inspirations and makes those ideas their own. If we look at the Souls comparison, we can see that while a more accurate comparison might be something like Sekiro, the stance damage and shield damage is not the be-all end-all like in Sekiro, meaning that instead, more focus is placed upon learning what combos you have room to execute between attacks, and of course, memorizing parry timings in rhythm with the boss's attacks are still here. Aside from this, there isn't much else to go off of. You're given a free aiming gun, a jump button, perfect dodging capabilities, and a series of fast-moving super moves to execute, making the combat feel much more akin to Nier or action games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. In fact, the air dash looks almost exactly like the one featured in DMC Devil May Cry. Combos can be chained together easily, and the different cooldown-based abilities offer utility and style, allowing them to be used with intrinsic and extrinsic intentions. Where the gameplay's biggest inspiration lies is in Nier Automata. Surely something the creators of said series are flattered by if the collaborative DLC is anything to go by. This comparison runs deeper than the surface-level parallel of a woman running around a wasteland with a drone at her side. It extends to the philosophical themes of what makes something human, where the future of humanity lies, and of course, not going much deeper than a very surface-level allusion to philosophical or religious themes. Sorry, hot take. Even the lack of subtlety is the same. To be, like to be or not to be, in a game about androids is a little on the nose. Now we have Adam and Eve, like the Bible, in a game about two characters with the power to come together as founders of a new race of humans. Again, a tad obvious, and it feels like the game blows its load a little early. I mean, Adam saves a character named Eve, often referred to by others as Angel, and we're meant to think this supposedly random scrapper isn't the most important guy in the world? I doubt it. Also, any side character in Stellar Blade looks like they're from Cyberpunk, and any important character looks like a supermodel, so from jawline alone, it was clear that Adam was going to be the most important figure next to Eve. To go back to what gives this game identity, however, it's the seamless blend of these different inspirations that make it feel like its own thing. This is because throughout all of these inspired events and mechanics are those that actually build upon those inspirations, and the game itself offers plenty of great moments too. When I first came across a large tunnel, I was under the assumption that I might run down it or find a train to take me to the other side. Instead, Eve uses her sword as a pseudo ripstick and shreds down in one of the biggest moments of realization for me. And what was that realization? That this game was gonna deliver some fucking sauce. What's interesting about Stellar Blade is that it doesn't start that way. In the beginning, the game plays things safe, not exactly boring. The opening alone is full of action, but in that it doesn't quite show its hand. Especially for those already familiar with the game's story, you'll know Stellar Blade does not front-load its best moments, and the reward for overcoming each challenge in front of you is getting to the next absolutely electric moment. The slower opening is necessary to setting up the world, and making it clear to the player that this isn't as derivative as you might think. While at first this seems like a post-apocalypse, Earth is clearly in a state of suffering from its own evolution, and having their homes trimmed in flickering neon sells the idea that the world wasn't destroyed by aliens or a random pathogen, but by itself. This, I believe, is why Adam, Eve, and Lily, our protagonists, are intentionally designed to be as conventionally attractive as possible, and why their bodies generally lack any exaggerated cyberware. Every other person is wearing a cybernetic mask, some kind of implant that scatters their face, limbs, and some of them are more machine than human. All of them, in one way or another, are imperfect. It makes thematic sense that when Eve and Adam are as attractive as they represent the different sides of humanity's purity. The environments in Stellar Blade reflect this dynamic too. Retro soda machines are placed as an oasis in a wasteland of discarded futurism, as if the tech itself is the infection, with people sprouting metal limbs like spores and fungus on a zombie. The story of what happened before the events of the game is slowly revealed to the player plainly, but it's clear to see from the environments around us. And while I can still understand the criticisms that it looks generic, it certainly has a PS3 era color palette for a lot of its runtime, and it really sucks that the majority of the game feels like it takes place in the wasteland, a glorified desert, and then an actual desert. There are some beautiful environments, but the game doesn't show them right away, which leads to the first 4 hours being the worst, though still not bad. Ultimately, Stellar Blade's identity won't be in its wastelands or its post-apocalyptic themed cities, but instead in its gameplay and characters. We see games sometimes get described as a moments game. Spider-Man 2 comes to mind. A game with excellent moments, but once you zoom out, it feels like the overall product isn't what fans were wanting. Stellar Blade has enough moments to cement itself as more than a collage of inspirations. Because it allows itself to be consumed through this framework, it sheds new light on the different homages the game makes, such as naming the hub city Zion, a clear reference to the city in the Matrix under the same phonetic name. Identity doesn't imply quality. Games like Suicide Squad and Concord are iconic for the worst reasons, and surely, just because something is unique doesn't mean it's good. Fortunately, Stellar Blade's gameplay is by far its greatest quality, and it's because of those oh-so-coveted moments. Not the moments where Eve flashes her clam to the camera, but where she exudes all the power fantasy fulfillment you could want from an action game. The combat in Stellar Blade is the game's bread and butter, but that doesn't mean its other facets aren't capable of contributing to the greater experience. For example, one of the most memorable moments I had was when I was sent to a far-off part of the wasteland called the Forbidden Area. It required me to descend into a deep crater in search of a new item. A few parts came together to create this moment. Most notable was the silence. Stellar Blade has music playing at all times, which is good because the music is great, but that constant presence makes the lack of music incredibly impactful, as though the world itself is holding its breath, staggered that one might actually enter the Forbidden Lands. In reality, this is nothing more than a hole in the ground with a boss fight at the bottom, but the fact that it's here at all, and is given enough tension in that moment, makes it stand out. It also marks a trend for Stellar Blade, which is in the quality of its side content. Not all of the side missions are good, and sure, some are just fetch quests, but many of them have interesting storylines to them, and in some cases have entire boss fights on par with those we see in the main game. There's a reasonable expectation that any side activity won't yield the same thrill that a primary mission will, but when you're tasked with searching for some people's memory sticks, a standard task, and enter an area glazed in a thunderous overcast, the first assumption is that this weather is here to arbitrarily make the area feel more perilous. However, as you explore, you'll find a boss fight against an enemy wielding two swords infused with lightning, and you'll see that this Nativa is in fact the one causing the thunder. The fight itself is excellent, and I want to stay focused on the moment here, because there were so many like it, and it led to a constant feeling of being on your toes. When these epic adventures are set up like side activities, I never wanted to skip anything, thinking I knew what was in store. Of course, the reward of these moments is often combat, and that wouldn't be a reward if that combat wasn't so good. Initially, it appears combat is a hybrid of FromSoft's victories, basic light attack, heavy attack, dodge, and a Sekiro-esque parry. It's simple, but works surprisingly well. Enemies have health, shield, and multiple points of balance. Shields are broken by attacking, though can be destroyed faster through special abilities, causing their health to take more damage, and a point of balance is broken after each successful parry. Parrying doesn't interrupt combos all the time, meaning a single combo can allow you to parry and thus take off a point of balance multiple times. Once an enemy is off balance, they are open to a special riposte called Retribution, which takes a chunk of health off and always looks slick no matter who is on the receiving end. The animations for Retribution are similar for overworld enemies, but against bosses they are always unique and a genuine treat to see. There were plenty of times where I could have beaten a boss but prolonged the fight just to make sure I saw the Retribution animation. They were always that good. Combat works because there is always player agency, even when the player doesn't dictate the pace of the fight. Your partner is often leading, but reacting to their attacks with fluidity is rewarding because the sound design, visuals, and of course the end goal of Retribution all contribute to a small moment where you feel a complete mastery over the enemy to the point of almost toying with them. Blocking is a reaction to the enemy, but parrying in this way feels proactive, like playing a game against someone you know you'll beat, saying sure, you can go first. The best showcase of this is against the Guardians that block the Laboirs, as they regain their balance after each combo, so the only way to get that sweet Retribution is to memorize their combos entirely. Finding that rhythm just feels good. And when combat is a dance, keeping rhythm ensures fun for the player. If we want to ignore parrying and be more aggressive, then we can focus on the beta and burst skills. These skills are charged by doing damage and parrying, and they offer offensive ways to overwhelm either a group or an individual. It's pretty basic stuff, but goes a long way for allowing us to be proactive, especially in boss fights. Because these abilities are charged through parrying, it means that in order to earn the right to lead in our dance, we have to successfully follow for a time. We must prove to the game through nailing the parry timings that we are capable of taking charge, making this a part of the power fantasy that is the most rewarding. However, some skills are better than others. The shield breaker and triplet will be invaluable for boss fights, but the slash and cross wave saw significantly less use as the game went on. And the same is true for the beta skills, as overdrive and punishing edge were all I used for being the most effective and best looking respectively. Often when looking at combat systems, there are two sides, often leaning more towards one over the other. There's the feel and visuals, or there's the mechanical side. The Kenway saga of Assassin's Creed games have great looking combat, but there isn't a whole lot of depth in the chain killing. It's still fun because it makes you feel like a badass, but I never felt particularly challenged or rewarded at any point. Then I think of games like Hollow Knight, where the gameplay is great, but combat isn't insanely flashy. Now, one side isn't better than the other, but ideally, you want a bit of both, and that is exactly what Stellar Blade provides. Every challenge is rewarded with a gruesome takedown, and there are so many great moments that take place around the many boss fights that made me instantly want to do a New Game Plus playthrough. Stellar Blade's weakest gameplay moments are unfortunately always in between the boss fights. We'll talk about those soon, but it's important to talk about the basic encounters because sometimes they aren't all that fun. Like most Souls games, you can be easily overwhelmed by more than one enemy, and that's not a problem, but I did find that enemy AI overlapped attacks a little too often. This would be fine in a slower game, but Stellar Blade isn't slow, so there were plenty of moments where I was struggling to find a gap to even get a single attack in. None of the individual enemies were annoying though, except for the gunners. What the actual fuck, man? In the first open area, they can be kind of annoying, but they don't do a ton of damage, so mistakes are hardly punished. However, in the later open area of the Wasteland, they fire multiple shots that constantly stagger you, meaning that when the first shot hits, you gotta sit there and put the fucking controller down. Genuinely, when I see enemies in this game, I get excited to try a new combo, but whenever I see these stupid looking fuckers, I instantly head the other way. Basic combat remains enjoyable into the late game because there are a ton of combos for you to pull off. A mix of heavy attacks and light attacks will result in better damage, and some absolutely masterful animations. I'm trying to avoid talking about it too much so I don't put you guys to sleep, but fuck me, the animations all over this game are top notch for Eve. Her heavy attacks always have weight, the use of slow motion is conservative so as not to kill any pace, and it comes together with Eve's grunts and the monster's painful groans to create a power fantasy in even the most basic encounters. Animations aren't perfect entirely here, but I think they're good where it matters. Sure, the lip syncing is borderline amateur at times, but I really don't mind that. What I do mind is some of the enemy animations. A caveat, this is a rare issue, but some bosses have combos where they put their entire weight into an attack to the point where they lose their balance. This communicates to the player that their combo is over and thus open to a counterattack. This is not the case, as instead, their stumbling is blended into a wind-up for their real final hit. This makes sense given that we are fighting beastly animals, but this still feels unintuitive for the player. Sure, you can learn pretty easily how to be prepared for this, but I still believe that the first time around, there should be enough of a telegraph for players to react to something without having prior knowledge of how the attack is going to go. Stellar Blade does this well with any enemies wielding a sword, as they always have a solid wind-up that you can be somewhat prepared for. It's actually because of this consistency that I love the combat so much despite being relatively quite bad at it. As far as defense goes, we've spoken a lot about parrying, and that's because while it is the riskiest play, it's also the most rewarding. However, there are other methods of defense, like blocking and dodging. Blocking will drain some of your shield, and once the shield is gone, blocking won't negate full damage. Dodging is like any other game and includes a perfect dodge. To add to standard dodging, some enemies have attacks that can't be blocked, and some that must be dodged in a certain way. Some will force you to dodge towards the enemy, initiating a blink, and another will see you pushing away from them. I like both of these mechanically because they offer a bit more intention to dodging. Often, because of the small moment of invulnerability provided, dodging becomes a free button to not get hit. But more depth is added when you're forced to consider where and when to dodge, and of course, both animations look great and add to the moment. Because we have a dash ability that closes the gap between us and the enemy, it's easy to keep pressure on. Having a dodge that pushes us back and puts us back into that neutral phase means we get another moment of circling our opponent and building the tension before one of us strikes first. It's common in games like this, but I still love that it happens. It's one of those moments in the game that brings everything together. If we're going to talk about the best moments in Stellar Blade, we can't ignore the boss fights. This is where the magic happens. The stuff in between basic combat, platforming, world building, yeah, it's good, but these are some of the most consistently enjoyable boss fights in a game I've played in a long time. The key? Consistency. I can confidently say that throughout my entire playthrough, I never once died to a glitch or something I would deem bullshit, i.e. an attack that is borderline impossible to dodge, and yet this game kicked my ass. Just before I get into the specifics, I need you to understand how hard your game has to go for me to enjoy having my shit rocked. The unidentified Naytiba boss fight took me 3.5 hours. I had to pause after 2 hours and go for a walk. That's how rough it was, and yet Every time I tried again, I was looking forward to it. The same goes for Raven, the fight that directly follows this one. The vibe of these fights is excellent. There is just enough room for error, and the music was so good that I was more than happy to bash my head against the wall. I looked forward to nailing those parry timings, finding new strategies, and eventually getting to a point where I could perfectly parry an entire combo like it was nothing. Eve is built up as this peak performance predator, and being able to do that, feel that in-game, holy shit. I mentioned in my Bloodborne video that a frustration I had with the newer Souls games and Elden Ring is that I was often in a position where an enemy was doing what felt like an endless combo, and I just had to sit there twiddling my thumbs. With a proactive parry system like this, those endless combos were endless opportunities. Then we can consider how short the runbacks are, meaning I was never forced to sit in a corner when I messed up. Another issue I have with Elden Ring specifically is that there never really is a neutral game. Elden Ring is turn-based, and 90% of the time, if me and the boss are facing each other down and I want to cast an incantation or drink something, the boss will lunge or do whatever else to interrupt my turn. It forces me to wait for the boss's attack, and it can be super annoying when an enemy attacks only once you've locked yourself into an animation. Stellar Blade ditches this. Bosses act on their own, not influenced by if you're healing. You'll still be punished for not healing at optimal times, but that kind of forgiveness adds so much needed margin for error. Finally, the biggest strength is variety. In the early game, Stellar Blade will present monsters that are all reminiscent of earthly creatures. Birds, horses, gorillas, and these were fine. But by the end of the game, they began introducing more unique designs. One fight takes place in a space station lounge against a Japanese-inspired demon amongst some artificial flora, and is immediately followed up with a demonic monstrosity, and while it isn't a boss fight, this too is followed up by a segment featuring a fucking biblically accurate angel. The variety isn't just in design, but in movesets and phases. When bosses enter their second, third, sometimes fourth phase, they introduce new moves and meaningfully change the fight, so even if you aren't necessarily struggling on the boss, you'll find yourself being kept on your toes, which is especially important when we factor in how long a lot of the later boss fights are. Eve herself has variety too, with different hairstyles, outfits, and accessories to wear. The hair alone is great, as each piece has proper physics and a few colors to choose from too. I do wish we could have had more colors for the hair, as each style only gets 4 colors seemingly chosen at random. Glasses and earrings too offer style, but I found myself not loving the selection of outfits. Now granted, there are over 70 outfits, which is a stupidly high number, and I've always been a little picky, so you'll notice that by the mid-game I found one and stuck with it until the end of the game. But in spite of my pickiness, I think there's a solid selection between armor, casual wear, and of course, more than a few risque fits for those who want to do a one-handed challenge run. These options help make each moment your own in some way. I've spoken about the larger moments, but there were plenty of small moments in my playthrough where I thought to myself, wow, the people that made this game really care about the player experience. Well, mostly. When completing quests in the previous areas, the moment the quest is fulfilled, you're given a prompt to return to the vendor, saving time, which is huge! I mentioned boss runbacks being very minimal, which I think again is great, and while not necessarily good game design, is something I am very fond of. When you find a locked door that requires a secret code, if you've discovered that code, then you can display it next to the keypad, so you don't need to flip between your inventory and the lock. It's not just details for convenience, but for enjoyment too. When you do something significant in certain areas, the music will change to reflect that, helping to make the world feel truly impacted by your actions. When crossing a bridge with Adam, he asks that you don't look down, and if you do, he says this:
"Whatever you do, don't look down." Aw, come on.
It's cute, but fun. There are also fun collectible cans to pick up. These are products from before the fall of Earth, and they always see Eve striking a kind of pose you'd see on a soda advertisement. It's a small thing that helps give this game some added flair and identity. Other collectibles include outfits and of course, upgrade materials. Some materials can be used to add more charges to your Estus flask, rechargeable tumbler, and there are different combat mods and exosuits that can help you find a particular playstyle. I was rarely impressed by what I found, but I think that's more due to me being rather cemented in my build early on. Ultimately, when it comes to games like this, where there are so many great moments, it's easy to miss the wider plot at hand. I mean, god, it's hard not to get distracted by Eve skating down a hypertube to K-pop music as it seamlessly transitions into a fucking boss fight, but the larger story in Stellar Blade shouldn't be forgotten, as I think it has plenty of strengths. Ultimately, the finer details of the plot have a lot of kinks and small issues, but the larger beats are solid, and the world building is what's going to make this game's story better as time goes on. When the story is a distant memory and you only remember the best moments and major plot points, that's where Stellar Blade shines. Stellar Blade's story is best discussed with two facets in mind: world building and plot. While these two facets overlap, looking at where and how they intersect can showcase some of the story's strengths and weaknesses. The lore surrounding the story is well crafted, full of intrigue, mystery, and plenty of homages to the game's different inspirations. But the story itself is full of shoddy voice acting, strange writing choices, and a shockingly weak protagonist. Let's start by looking at the opening, because it's a great exhibit. The game opens with dropships sending pods down to Earth. The game immediately subverts expectations by having us follow a particular pod, making us assume it's the main character before it's shot down and we swap to our actual protagonist pod. This opening does a good job of informing the player of what's going on, perhaps a little too well. For one, there's an immediate assumption that Eve is a robot alongside her colleagues, and I want you to remember that, okay? I'm trusting you. Eve is taken out of her pod by her superior Taki. We get our first of many fan service moments where a nude Eve is thrusted out, literal explosions behind her. I assume so the audience could go, "Oh my god, this is what gaming's all about!" Chances are, if you're like me, then you had a feeling throughout this opening of being more enamored with Taki than Eve, and I believe that's intentional. Eve is completely out of the loop. She seems underprepared for the ensuing battle, and this is reflected in the player's skill as they are just learning the controls and are likely to be hit. Taki is a guide not just for directing the player literally as she leads the way, but directs the player's goals. Taki is able to effortlessly take down the Naytibas, and is shown to be a total badass through and through. I actually wrote in my notes that at this point, I wanted to play as Taki more than Eve. Her outfit is cooler, sword is cooler, and just overall seems more fun. Games do this plenty. They show you a glimpse into the future, a future where the player has better gear, higher skill, and more knowledge. They do this to subtly motivate you, and here, it worked well. This opening is intense and is a great high note to start the game on. Essentially, everyone from Eve's dive is slaughtered, and in what could have been her final moments, she's saved from an Alpha Naytiba by a human named Adam. Adam enlists Eve's help to find a power core needed for one of humanity's last remaining cities, Zion. The trek to Zion is much slower and functions like a large tutorial, ending in the introduction of Lily, another android. Our trio is assembled relatively fast, and we have a loop introduced where we find more power cores so that Oracle, Zion's cyborg leader, can tell us where the Alpha Naytibas are. Eve's mission is to eliminate the Elder Naytiba, and that can only be done once she has collected enough Alpha Naytiba cores to create a Master Core. I would consider this the second act of the game, and it's integral to the world building, which can have some consequences for the overall storytelling. Zion is a nice hub world, and the people are a highlight. We can encounter a plethora of interesting side stories featuring barbers, back alley saleswomen, and help the people of Zion, proving that Eve, referred to as Angel, is actually here to help. There's a decent amount of internal politics at play, with some being skeptical of Oracle's leadership and even more skeptical of Eve's intentions. One of the highlights is with a woman in a bar who can't speak or move. We can help her find parts to bring her speech back, but her partner seems to feel a kind of insecurity, seeing as someone just showed up and did his job for him with significant ease. He then goes out on his own to find parts in order to help her walk again, but gets injured along the way, and with our help is able to reunite with her, and her with some legs. I think this quest did lean on the cheesy side, especially with the whole "I would much rather you be safe" stuff, even if it is wholesome. The quest also marked a trend, which is that happy endings are often possible. By the time you get to Zion, the Nier influences become obvious, and Nier is a depressing game, so I was expecting every quest to end in some kind of death or tragedy. What Zion also offers is a glimpse into what humanity is like, as they are almost all heavily modified with some kind of cyberware. Fortunately for them, it looks cool, but it implies a kind of impurity, one not shared by Eve and her friends. There's a general theme throughout the game about humanity evolving itself into redundancy, and so I think it's interesting to see these cybernetics as a manifestation of that, and thus, it makes sense that most people are still, even in the apocalypse, finding ways to hoard and greed. It's interesting too when we look at Kaya, who doesn't have any cyberware as perhaps being too young to be influenced by that corruption. As for Eve, we get to see firsthand how, even at the end of the world, people still charge for services, scrape together what they can to get by, but she also realizes that these are still good people. The quests I give you will often lead to locations where you can find text logs detailing a figure named Mother Sphere, one that many people worship and is seemingly the creators of Eve and Lily. This deity is the one who sent you on your journey, and as you keep finding logs, you'll notice that some people are losing faith. This is initially due to feelings of hopelessness. They called out to her and she did not answer their prayers. This eventually turns into full-blown conspiracies against Sphere, and often, those penning said conspiracies are found dead. It creates doubt in the player, Eve, and most, Lily. Lily and Adam act as the devil and angel on your shoulders throughout the game, which creates a problem in that Eve never seems to have any strong opinions about what she sees, often hardly commenting on them. She is shown to have doubts about Mother Sphere, but her lack of delving into those topics makes her entirely flat. Adam is the voice of reason, often in opposition to Mother Sphere, and supporting the idea that Eve might not know everything. Lily does the opposite, finding whatever trapeze her mind can swing from to convince herself that they are the good guys. Near the end of the game, there is a choice that can be boiled down to accepting or rejecting Mother Sphere, so it makes sense that Eve doesn't lean too strongly to one side, because then the player could have her make a contradictory decision. However, the problem remains that Eve doesn't seem to feel much of anything. Her stoicism prevents any kind of internal exploration, and she becomes almost robotic. Oh, yeah, Eve's a robot. You might be thinking, no dip, dude. The exoskeleton, the birth by projectile space pod, the superhuman abilities, the actual electricity she can produce, and the fact she doesn't look like any of the other humans makes that kind of obvious. And yeah, it sure does. Unfortunately, all that metal alloy makes Eve's head rather dense, and so a major plot point is her and Lily coming to the realization that they are in fact not human, which went beyond falling flat and straight into comedic territory because, as mentioned above, how could they possibly not know this? I'm glad the game doesn't dwell on it for too long, and maybe I'm missing something, but this twist, if you want to call it that, is extremely humorous. Other questionable decisions come from how quickly everybody acts like they've known each other forever. Both Adam and Lily, on 2 separate occasions, say something like, "Typical Eve."
Typical Eve.
Typical Eve.
And it's like, you guys just fucking met. What are you saying? As the game transitions into its 3rd act, we get a special tangent only accessible to those who have maxed out their affection meter with Lily. This is done through finding more information about Mother Sphere and creating seeds of doubt within her. Adam and Lily both watch everything you do through a companion drone, and you often hear their thoughts on what you find, not Eve's. This culminates in Lily asking the crew to go to Eidos 9, where she was hiding out for a time. It's a decent enough section even if, structure-wise, it was repetitive, but it ends at a greenhouse where we see Lily's friend that had essentially died, and we pick up an item that will be integral to a specific ending later on. The greenhouse section was the final nail in making me like and care about Lily far more than any other character. This Eidos 9 mission marks the end of Act 2, and it's where the game's pace picks up. Most of Act 2 was busy work around the wastelands, but there were still some highlights like the lavoirs we traveled to, which limit you to just the drone for combat. It reminded me a lot of Dead Space with the blood on the walls and the nativas possessing different corpses. There are only 2 segments like this, and in both cases, they ended before they got old. Generally, when it comes to the gameplay, the pacing of Stellar Blade shouldn't be overlooked. Downtime is here, but it's rare from Act 2 forward. A highlight specifically is at the end of a level in a metro station. We find Taki, our mentor from the beginning of the game, who has now been corrupted and transformed by a nativa into our next boss fight. This was an absolutely killer moment and satisfies the desire we had at the beginning of the game. Now we have more tools, cooler outfits, and the skill required to realize that we have become what we wanted in the beginning. What satisfies us even more is the Taki mode we're granted upon winning, which allows us to basically transform into her for a time and do insane damage alongside some great animations and a killer song. This transformation will be integral to some of the later boss fights too, as it gives players a moment to breathe when you're pinned down. Part of a problem I had with Act 2 was that the environments were rather bland. Post-apocalypse isn't a genre I find visually appealing as it is, but considering the 2 open areas we traveled across are both deserts, the color palette became tired. Fortunately, the palette and locales take a step up in the 3rd act. Arriving at the orbital elevator left me thinking the game was holding out on me, with its lush flora and enticing structures in the distance. The trek to said elevator is good, even if Adam needs to abandon the trip due to an issue in Zion, but this appropriately lets Lily and Eve bond a bit more. When Lily acts as Eve's doubt, even when in denial of said doubt, it makes sense that their shared time leaves an impact on her. As we ascend the orbital tower, we get the impression that the nativas are getting smarter. Instead of bumbling towards Eve, they're now stalking her and nearly getting the drop on her. There's also an interesting segment with an android that escorts us up the orbital elevator, but is abruptly crushed. The music that accompanies the robot is now distorted, and this death is significant because, assuming you've been to Eidos 9, you know that Mother Sphere isn't the malevolent god we're told. In fact, just before this segment, I went to pick up a health boost, something you do all throughout the game. Every time someone dies or Eve takes something from a body, she says a prayer. May your memories live on forever.
May your memories live on forever.
It implies that the memories of these robots will be uploaded to some kind of server, courtesy of Mother Sphere. And in that, they won't be entirely dead. I wish the game delved into this kind of android afterlife more. Would their personalities, a collage of those memories and experiences, be free to interact with each other in that server, accompanied by their bodies? It makes sense that the game doesn't mention this too much, considering that it becomes clear that the idea of an afterlife is bullshit. What's important though, is that once a seed of doubt is sown in Eve and Lily, she stops saying the prayer.
Now, I don't feel like praying.
This robot's death, despite being more aligned with our idea of an android, is given more weight because it's the first time we see an android corpse and know that it's not coming back. The section ends with another boss fight against a monstrosity of different humans. By this point, we know that humans created the Naytibas, and this boss is the final confirmation that these Naytibas were at one point human. The orbital elevator ends with an excellent sequence against the biblically accurate angel. I love this scene, and what struck me as most significant was this idea of ascension and seeing things people on Earth couldn't. There are a significant amount of allusions to the Bible, beyond Adam and Eve, and this orbital elevator, a tower reaching into space, feels like the game's own Tower of Babel. The story of Babel is a cautionary tale where, simply put, God punishes humans trying to build a tower to heaven. When we consider the parallels and see the Naytibas as a divine punishment, it follows that it was humanity's pride and ambition, thinking that they could ascend past the human race, that left them destroyed. When we learn the origins of Mother Sphere 2, this makes even more sense. Almost all of the world's problems in Stellar Blade are caused by human ambition, in one way or another. In the story of Babel, the punishment God gives to the humans is division, and if the builders of the tower were to succeed, they'd need to overcome that division. The true ending being behind a marriage between two strands of humanity's evolution supports this theory. It should be noted that the director for the game said that the biblical imagery isn't meant to be looked at too deeply, but fuck it, I'm having fun and it makes me like the game more. When we return to Zion, Adam is nowhere to be found, but we do encounter the Alpha Naytiba from the beginning of the game, the one who killed Taki. This fight took me ages, but it's the beginning of a great streak of boss fights that are all challenging as hell, but never quite border into unfair territory. Once defeating the unidentified Naytiba, it turns out to be a human named Raven who runs away. We eventually find Oracle on his deathbed, who reveals that he is a Naytiba that wants Eve to succeed in her mission, seeing how much damage the Naytiba have caused. It explains how Oracle was just randomly able to know where the Alpha Naytibas are located, as it's assumed they have some kind of connection, or perhaps someone else was telling him. Oracle offers his own Naytiba core, allowing us to make the Master Core and find the nest where the Elder Naytiba lies. It seems Adam already went there too and could be in great danger. Lily decides to join on foot, and I appreciated a throwaway line that Lily gives to Adam about his drone earlier because it applies now.
And the stabilizer, scanner, and link sensors do all the work for you.
How did you?
It reasonably explains how you can still have your drone. It's on autopilot. Before entering the nest, the Naytiba from earlier, Raven, confronts us, explaining someone only referred to as him was meant to be hers, but instead, Eve was chosen. In order to prove her worth, she challenges Eve, but loses. This is a rare moment where Eve shows emotion, being incredibly angry at Raven, even refusing to kill her, instead disabling her, and leaving her to wallow in her own inadequacy. It's brutal, but earned. By now, the truth of Mother Sphere is laid bare. Essentially, humans, in an effort to evolve themselves, created Mother Sphere as a hyper-advanced AI that, with the goal to evolve humanity, found them eventually to be redundant. Mother Sphere then declared war on humans, and in an effort to survive, the humans turned themselves into Naytibas, with their monstrous designs being a result of their experimentation and haste. These days, the idea of Mother Sphere rings all too true when we consider how quickly AI is evolving right now. Each year, AI is making leaps and bounds in replacing us. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years, all of YouTube is created and run by AI. I'd love to say that there will always be a desire for that human element, but the problem then is, how can we tell what's human? I used to be so good at detecting when something was made with AI, but these days, it's getting harder and harder. And that's just the beginning. I don't intend to get too dystopian here, but every advancement made towards technology designed to make life easier continues to make life redundant at the same time. I can't help but make the connection to Stellar Blade's story. Once entering the nest, the Naytibas don't attack, and instead clear the way, as if we're being welcomed in. At the heart of the nest is Adam, who reveals himself to be the Elder Naytiba. Adam was against Andro Eidos, but since he is the most evolved of the Naytibas, he found some empathy and decided that he wanted to help humanity evolve instead, but knew that Naytibas alone wouldn't be enough. He began searching for an android that could fuse with him to enter the next step in human evolution and unite Naytibas and Andro Eidos. Adam initially saved Eve out of kindness, but realized that she could be the perfect specimen for his plan, and began guiding her to these different areas as a means of testing her and opening her eyes. Adam knew that we were going to find things that would make us question Mother Sphere, and in turn, be more likely to join him. We are now given a choice to either take Adam's hand or refuse. I think this twist works mostly well. I knew Adam was going to be important by name alone, but the implications of how much he was pulling the strings was a satisfying reveal, and made a second playthrough more fun. Adam didn't plan for Raven to attack Zion, and it seemed he was never going to choose Raven because what she had seen had driven her mad. I mentioned earlier this idea of purity. If Adam wants to have the best chance of humanity advancing forward, he needs an Andro Eidos that is not just pure of body, but of mind too. And Raven was too violent to be worthy. I believe this plays a large role in how attractive both Eve and Adam are, as their beauty is meant to convey that purity, and the idea that they are the peak of their respective strains of humanity. Refusing puts you into a fight against him, and joining him causes Eve and him to form a new being that is both Andro Eidos and Naytiba, to Lily's dismay. The problem for me is that Adam essentially disappears by this point. The new version of them is 90% Eve, and it's great and all to see Eve get the Super Saiyan-esque ultimate form, but we don't get an explanation of where Adam went. Eve's thoughts seem the same. Maybe his contribution was making her jump up a cup size and making sure gamers fell back in their chairs at the sight of some digital milkies, but unless Eve can suddenly open jars, that might be all Adam actually contributes to this new human form. Jokes aside, I can't hate on this too much because having Adam present in any way could have overcomplicated what was already a crazy ending. Once we absorb Adam, we have a boss fight against Lily's mech that is now being hijacked by Mother Sphere, targeting Eve, who is now technically the Elder Naytiba. The game ends with Mother Sphere declaring war on Eve and her being determined to save the rest of humanity. The ending is satisfying, though there are still many questions left unanswered. Where did Adam go? Does Eve control the Naytibas? How can they be the future of humanity? Not to get too into the nitty-gritty, but if Adam is a Naytiba, an organic life form, and Eve is synthetic, if they were to somehow lay eggs as their new one being, wouldn't the future of humanity be entirely Naytiba? All of Eve's personality, body, and mind are synthetic, and I don't think that would genetically be passed on. If she is now human because of her transformation with Adam, does that mean she can lay eggs or transform others? The game doesn't need to answer these questions, but I would like an answer, and maybe that would all come in a potential sequel. Thematically, the ending satisfies all it needs to, and that's not even getting into the moments surrounding that ending. Seriously, this game is great at nailing a vibe. Overall, ironically, Stellar Blade's biggest weakness is its main character. She's bland for most of the game, and is propped up by the people she meets. Adam and Lily felt as though they were extensions of Eve's personality, and while I like Lily a lot, she's probably my favorite character, I can't help but feel as though her purpose is to pick up the pieces left behind by Eve. She is the embodiment of Eve's loyalty and eventually her doubt towards Mother Sphere. Pacing-wise, I think the story moves fast enough, especially by the second act, assuming you aren't doing any side quests. However, another strength of the story is the side quests genuinely enhancing the main quest, and quality-wise are typically on par with that main quest. In spite of Eve's disappointing character, there are some great ideas here. I've always had a soft spot for Christian themes and the potential horror of biblically accurate angels, and the implications of those themes, especially when we consider stories like the Tower of Babel, that clearly parallel the events of the main game. We can see that there's more to the game beneath the surface. When it comes to the world building, which lies entirely beneath the surface, it's some of the best parts of the game. It's rather obvious from the beginning that Mother Sphere is going to be questionable, especially when we see the many near inspirations, but how we become disillusioned was engaging and remarkably different from its inspirations. Overall, Stellar Blade was flat out fucking awesome. Few games deliver such a great string of incredible moments, and it's a damn shame that there was controversy during the game's release that distracted from that. I know some of that controversy was the game's fault. I think when you have a character this jiggly, you kind of invite some critique, but the censorship controversy to me is completely unwarranted. If the game was concerned with showing too much skin, then they removed the nude suit or the plethora of Nier Automata suits to actively increase her breast size. For as much as I'm not a fan of this look, I can at least respect the director's intentions, which is simply that he thinks it's cool. He's certainly not pretending like a pair of honkers is a political statement. Depending on when this video goes up, Stellar Blade will have released or is about to release on PC, and for the record, I think it's definitely worth the money. Few games with a focus on difficult combat actually have the consistency in their hitboxes, animations, and AI to make that difficulty fun and fair. This is easily the biggest defense against those who think this game's sexuality is the focus, or more colloquially, is a gooner game. Look, for research purposes, I've played games that are made as an excuse to yoink your sploink too. And when that's the intention, the surrounding game is always lacking. This game has great music, set pieces, and environments are so good, but the palette needs some work, and the characters are mostly fun and the story is great. There's also replayability too. Once the story is complete, you can begin New Game Plus, which is mostly standard, but I love that every outfit you found can be found again, but this time with a different variant. You can also wear Raven's outfit from the beginning and keep your Ascended form over the Tacky mode. There are also exclusive upgrades to your combos that make them significantly better, which is needed because completing the game also unlocks hard mode, which tweaks enemy encounters, behavior, and damage. If you thought normal was hard, then fuck me, wait until you see this. I love when games go above and beyond for a New Game Plus, and this is a good example of how to properly implement New Game Plus across the board. With the sequel reportedly being in development, I'm concerned with where they'll go, as the story was wrapped up rather nicely. I wouldn't mind some kind of prequel story, or even one in the distant future, where we journey as someone else uncovering a mystery of what happened to Eve after the events of the game. It would mesh well with the game's storytelling method and could prevent ShiftUp from being backed into a corner. If we have another game as Eve, then there will be a direct expectation that we'll get answers to our burning questions. If we learn what happened through diaries and audio logs like we did in this game, it allows ShiftUp to beat around the bush a little bit. However, knowing how they handled this game, if they go that route, they're gonna find some way for us to fight her, which would be awesome. Stellar Blade is a love letter to modern action games. Its inspirations and aspirations are clear as day, which would be a problem if the game didn't do so much to leave its own mark on the genre. I think Eve might struggle to be a mascot for Sony simply because of the customization and the fact that even in the promotional material, she can't keep herself to one outfit. But, and I might be going too far here, this is one of the better games on the PS5. I genuinely loved it. And normally when I finish a video on a game, I consider myself finished with it, but honestly, I'm gonna jump right back in after this. So thank you to those who recommended the game to me. And by the way, final note, I'm placing my bets now. We're gonna see a nude mod in no more than 12 hours when this shit launches on PC, and the inflated mods will probably take a week, maybe less. Hello, thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to say, if you have noticed the last few videos have been in 4K, this was actually the first video I recorded in 4K. And the reason was that the 1080p videos look like shit. and I want to give a shout out to Sergeant Gandhi69 who left this comment, and it basically opened my eyes to how bad the videos were looking. So I was like, okay, 1080p is not cutting it anymore. I need to do higher resolution and higher bitrate. So now we're at 4K. I think it looks much better personally, and I hope you agree. I will say that my recording file size has gone up a lot, but I think it's worth it because it looks good. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for pointing that out, and you have left a direct impact on the video's quality. So pat yourself on the back and consider yourself responsible. I also want to give a big shout out to our patrons whose names are on screen now. And I just want to say thank you for always supporting the channel, because the only reason I could upgrade to recording in 4K is I bought a new motherboard, a new CPU, a new graphics card, more RAM. I got more storage because I need more storage to store the files, and I also upgraded my monitor to a 4K monitor. And that stuff is not cheap, and so being able to do that and invest that into the channel because of the support you guys have shown me is really appreciated. I'm also really grateful because this is the first time in my life that I've had what I consider to be a high-end gaming rig. I've always been just for like budgeting and financial reasons, not really on the cutting edge. And I wouldn't say I'm at the cutting edge. Like, I got a 5070 and I have friends that have 5090s and I think they're psychos for that. But like every modern release, I've been able to play basically maxed out settings at 4K. And that's something I've really never been able to experience before. And I just want to say thank you, because I think it's really cool. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that it is because of your support that I'm able to do that and then present videos to you in that frame rate and in that quality level. So yeah, I mean, that's basically all I have to say. I loved working on the Stellar Blade video. I feel like I really had to reel in how much I love this game, but I really do love it. Like I'm kind of head over heels for it. It feels like the best game I've played in such a long time. And I know it's like, yeah, the story isn't that good, and yeah, the character, like Eve, isn't that great, but those are all things I don't really care about that much. Like, for a critique, like, yeah, I have to, you know, focus on that and acknowledge that. But when it comes to me personally, just enjoying the game, I don't really give a shit about it. So it's kind of like the things that I care about the most are the things this game nails. Yeah, so, all right, my air conditioner just turned on, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have an excellent day, and I will see you in the next video, which will hopefully also be in 4K, except for I have a Far Cry Primal video that I recorded in 1440 because that was while I was like mid-upgrade, because I didn't upgrade everything at once. I waited a little bit so that I didn't, you know, blow all my money. And yeah, so hope you guys enjoy the higher video quality, and I love you guys. Take care.